Hi, I'm Allison, and this is Learning Literature. If you have any requests for books you'd like me to discuss, just put them in the comments. Today, I'll be analyzing Arthur Miller's 1953 play, The Crucible, focusing on the theme. If you could use a refresher on the plot, I have a video with the summary of the play that I'll link to in the description. Given the historical setting and plot of the play, the main theme needs to address the town's hysteria and ensuing witch hunt. However, Miller does a beautiful job of also making this a play about a man. Following John Proctor and others gives us important secondary themes about individuals. So, the main theme first. By conflicting with rational thinking, fear can lead to mass hysteria. To see this theme demonstrated, we need to identify what motivates people's conclusions, recognizing the role of fear in their thinking in order to understand how the town was led to such hysteria. It's worth pausing for a moment to point out that there are other historical examples of this happening. During the start of the French Revolution, there was the Great Fear, when mere rumors of an aristocratic conspiracy to stop the new revolution led the peasants to panic and riot, destroying the land and documents of their lords. Or the War of the Worlds fiasco, when a fictional radio broadcast involved news bulletins of Martians landing, and listeners, not realizing that this was an adaptation of a novel, believed them to be real news bulletins. In the ensuing panic, people frantically called police and newspapers, and many fled their homes seeking safety. Examples like this support the idea that fear gives rise to widespread lack of rational thinking. These examples also emphasize the value of understanding what happened in order to avoid such panicked responses in the future. The opening narration of the play offers a few explanations for how a town could have, gone so crazy. There is a suggestion that the people feared Native American attacks, witches, and the unexplored forests, all of which affected the clarity of their thinking. All of these fears were reasonable to them, though we might dismiss some as irrational. Or that the theocracy, the rule by religious figures, that the society had instituted for survival, was now overwhelming its people with oppression and fear, inclining the people to rebel. Or that there were ulterior motives, like seeking land or personal vendettas. Before the play even starts, we're offered suggestions for what might be motivating the masses. Many of the suggestions argue that fear played a prominent role in people's thinking. Act 1 is explicitly about fear, though underlying motivations are also revealed. Paris is scared for his sick daughter, and, maybe more than this, scared for his position in town. The Putnams are scared for their sick daughter. Abigail is scared of being punished for dancing in the woods. There is a sense of urgency, a desire to do anything to fix these problems. Act 2 shows the consequences of fear-based actions in Act 1, when well-respected and trusted women like Rebecca Nurse and Elizabeth Proctor are arrested. The town has effectively gone crazy at this point, trusting the word of a group of children enough to arrest and execute people. Their fear has led them to draw irrational conclusions and to be willing to act on them. Throughout the play, we see examples of the poor reasoning that people are using. They draw conclusions with insufficient or weak evidence, such as concluding Mary Warren is a witch based on girls claiming to see a yellow bird. They misidentify causes, concluding Tituba is a witch based on her making Abigail laugh in church. They overgeneralize, concluding that because Goody Osborne lied about muttering her commandments, she lied about not being a witch. By the fourth act, we see remorse out of the town as they realize the failing of their previous conclusions. They have turned on Abigail and Paris, and Danforth realizes the court has lost the town's support. Once the people see the consequences of their actions, see how widespread the hysteria has become, they begin to reevaluate their conclusions and suspect that their thinking was clouded. However, it is too late. The play closes with the executions of Rebecca Nurse, Martha Corey, and John Proctor, virtuous townspeople who refused to make false confessions and thus died at the accusations of a group of children. As with many great artworks, this theme is reinforced by a secondary theme of a more personal nature. Acknowledging one's mistakes and seeking redemption requires bravery, but is possible. Fear, that is, can affect one's willingness to correct mistakes. This theme is demonstrated in many characters, most prominently in the protagonist, John Proctor, but also Reverend Hale, Mary Warren, and perhaps Judge Danforth. A related theme, which these characters also demonstrate, is that when we act immorally, we harm ourselves, whether or not anyone else ever finds out. Let's look for both themes in these characters' stories, focusing on Proctor. Having had an affair, Proctor is filled with guilt and self-loathing. Though the town is ignorant of his sin, he suffers immensely from his shattered self-image. Much of the play is about his striving for redemption, his attempt to once again have pride in himself. The damage done by his sin has nothing to do with any other person's judgment of him. This need for redemption involves more than simply the affair from months ago. When the play begins, Proctor still seems caught up in the relationship, being dishonest with himself about what it meant and what his true feelings are. In Act 1, when Proctor and Abigail meet, Proctor is friendly towards her, perhaps playful or flirtatious. Though he is clear with her that he will never touch her again, he admits that he may have looked up at her window and that he may think of her softly from time to time. He has not fully acknowledged the mistake of the affair, for he is downplaying its significance to Abigail and within his own mind. In Act 2, as he interacts with Elizabeth, Proctor is filled with guilt and anger at himself, but he is also angry at Elizabeth for not completely forgiving him. Given his actions towards Abigail that were revealed in Act 1, perhaps Elizabeth is right to still not trust him. Proctor is not honest with Elizabeth about his remaining feelings for Abigail, whether in some ways he wishes to resume the affair or simply does not wish to hurt Abigail. His refusal to acknowledge that his previous actions have been an implicit promise to Abigail and that she is malicious enough to seek Elizabeth's death reveal that dishonesty. Elizabeth is sure that Abigail is attempting to take her place as Proctor's wife. Proctor's insistence that she cannot think it is immediately undercut by the stage direction. He knows it is true. Ultimately, he is probably not honest with himself about these remaining feelings for Abigail. It is true that he is clear with her about not continuing the affair, and in this way, Proctor wishes the issue to be closed. But the mixed messages he sends her in Act 1 suggest the issue is not closed in his mind, and this uncertainty and hypocrisy cause him anguish. Until he finds the strength to fully face the damage done by his actions, he will not be able to find redemption and will continue to suffer. When Elizabeth is arrested, he understands the consequences of his actions. Pushing Mary Warren to admit her lies to the court, he speaks for both himself and her. "Make your peace with it. Now hell and heaven grapple on our back, and all our old pretense is ripped away. Make your peace. Peace. It is a providence and no great change. We are only what we always were, but naked now. Aye, naked. And the wind, God's icy wind, will blow." Proctor struggles with his hypocrisy since the town does not know of his infidelity. He knows he must admit all he has done, fully accepting the shame and other consequences. This will not change who he is, but will simply let others know the truth about him and his sin, which is a sort of relief. This will be part of the process of fully acknowledging his mistake, a necessary step towards redemption and reducing his own suffering. In Act 3, he does this, confessing his crime to the court in an attempt to save Elizabeth's life, but his effort fails, and he is also sentenced to death. In Act 4, he has to decide whether to give a false confession to save his own life. Elizabeth knows how he has suffered under the guilt of his affair, so she knows how valuable it is for him to forgive himself and make his own decisions about his life. He is considering confessing merely because he sees himself as a hypocrite, but she sees better in him. When John goes to his death and Hale begs her to try to convince him again, she knows that he have his goodness now. God forbid I take it from him. Though she wants a life with him, she does not want him to confess merely because he sees himself as sinful. She knows that this honest action has given him pride in himself, and she values that more. John is initially drawn to give a false confession because he sees his refusal, his commitment to honesty, as hypocritical. Though he is not guilty of being a witch, he is filled with guilt for his adultery, so he does not feel worthy of dying as a martyr. Nothing spoiled by giving them this lie that were not rotten long before. He sees his confession as a punishment on himself, knowing that Elizabeth would never confess, as Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey have not, and thus concludes confessing is evil. Good, then, it is evil, and I do it. This reveals how deeply he has hurt himself with his adultery. As the confession proceeds, though, he becomes more reluctant. I have 3 children. How may I teach them to walk like men in the world, and I have sold my friends? He knows that his confession legitimizes the court, and, in doing so, casts doubt on the purity of his friends who continue to proclaim their innocence. In the end, he does not want to live as a man filled with guilt, viewing himself as a liar. This is the sort of life he has been living since his affair, one of deception with a ruined self-image. Though he sees himself as sinful for the adultery, he redeems himself in his own eyes by not blackening his name as a liar. With that, he sees some shred of goodness in John Proctor and begins to forgive himself. Through John, we see both secondary themes clearly demonstrated. The immense suffering he undergoes is internal: guilt for having hurt Elizabeth, shame at being someone who betrays the woman he loves. His suffering is unrelated to whether or not his crime is known. There is no getting away with it, because he knows what he has done. It takes immense strength for him to seek redemption, but he does ultimately achieve it. Such redemption centers on his view of himself. It requires taking full responsibility for the harm he has done and offering himself forgiveness for striving to do good. Like Proctor, Reverend Hale's is a story of redemption. His actions are driven by honesty, by sincerely seeking truth. He is not looking for a certain conclusion, but is instead evaluating the evidence he sees, being open to new evidence and new conclusions. This means being brave enough to consider that he has made mistakes. He advises Elizabeth, "Let you not mistake your duty, as I mistook my own." Though initially part of the court, he leaves when he concludes that Proctor is honest and Abigail is not, against the court's judgment. Hale returns to Salem, understanding that he sentenced innocent people to die and wanting to save any lives that he can now. "There is blood on my head. Can you not see the blood on my head?" He is willing to seek false confessions for those sentenced to hang in an attempt to save their lives. Life, woman, life is God's most precious gift. No principle, however glorious, may justify the taking of it. His pursuit of redemption does not save any lives, but he does all he can to try to save these people, to try to correct the damage done by his mistaken judgments. Mary Warren emphasizes the bravery needed to take responsibility for one's mistakes through her own failure. Either motivated by an earnest desire to do the right thing or pressured by John Proctor to try to save Elizabeth and others, Mary admits to the court that she has been lying when giving evidence in accusations of witchcraft. However, when Abigail and the girls accuse her of being a witch, Danforth and the court believe Abigail and threaten Mary with hanging if she does not admit to being a witch. At this threat, Mary recants her confession and resumes her lie, fearing for her life. In doing so, she dooms Elizabeth and the others to die and brings a new accusation against John Proctor. Fear of being outcast and fear of being killed stop Mary from following through on acknowledging her own mistake and accepting its responsibilities. Though it is less explicit, there are hints that Judge Danforth dramatizes this point in the same way, refusing to admit a mistake because of fear. Like Hale, Danforth's journey centers on seeking truth. As a judge with people's lives in his hands, the stakes are quite high. When we first meet Danforth in Act 3, he is strict but willing to hear all contributions to the court, unlike Paris and Hawthorne, who push to dismiss those who are contentious. Danforth is open to Proctor's revelation that he had an affair with Abigail, and provides a fair method to investigate the truth of the accusation. Despite this evidence that he is concerned with truth, he is also concerned with protecting his reputation. One of the first points he makes in the play is demonstrating his power, naming how many are in jail and condemned to hang by his signature. He sees himself as important, and he values that reputation. When Proctor announces that Mary Warren has been lying, the stage direction tells us that Danforth is rapidly calculating this. And Danforth's first question is whether Proctor has spread this story to the village, later asking whether Proctor is trying to undermine this court. Here, he seems less concerned with truth and more with retaining the legitimacy of the court. After Mary Warren has accused Proctor of witchcraft, Proctor screams to Danforth, accusing Danforth of knowing the girl's accusations are false, but not having the strength to be honest about this conclusion. For them that quail to bring men out of ignorance, as I have quailed, and as you quail now, when you know in all your black hearts that this be fraud, God damns our kind especially, and we will burn together. Proctor is claiming that Danforth cowers from admitting that he has made a mistake, that fear stops him from accepting responsibility for his mistake, refusing to accept the damage to his reputation and guilt for the lives he has taken. In Act 4, when Hale and others beg him for postponements or pardons, Danforth proclaims, "I should hang 10,000 that dared to rise against the law, and an ocean of salt tears could not melt the resolution of the statutes." Danforth is raising the law above all other considerations. All that is important is following the law. He rejects any pardons, for they do not follow the procedures set by law, proclaiming, "I cannot pardon these when 12 are already hanged for the same crime. It is not just." This uniformity of punishment could be seen as an advocacy of justice, as Danforth claims, but in this case, it is clearly a violation of justice. Here, a blind following of the law exacerbates the injustices being done, as even more innocent people will be hanged. Hanging one person for witchcraft is immoral. Hanging more, simply to have uniformity to the first punishment, increases the immorality of the sentence. Having made the first mistake, the moral action is for a judge to attempt to correct his error by stopping the executions of remaining prisoners. This, however, would require admitting that the original hanging was a mistake. At this point in the play, the lack of confessions is casting doubt on the convictions of the court. Rather than considering this and the reasons for Hale's decision to leave the court, Danforth proceeds, angered that Hale has returned. Danforth is no longer concerned with justice, but is now exclusively concerned with protecting his reputation, ensuring that the actions he has done in the past are not tainted by his current actions, even if it means carrying out the executions of innocent people. He refuses to seek redemption by admitting his mistake. The primary plot of the play focuses on the town, and its theme centers on the role of fear in mass hysteria. The secondary plot focuses on John Proctor, and its theme centers on the role of fear in redemption. Arthur Miller offers us many insights into the damage, intellectual and psychological, that fear can do. He also offers us brave characters in Proctor and Hale to model how to combat such dangers. Thanks for joining me on Learning Literature. If you have any follow-up questions, put them in the comments. And if you found the video helpful, click the like button.